Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past, and I'm Dr. Cat. If, or indeed when, you take a trip to the theatre today, I think you're often expecting to see a costume performance on a stage with a set, with scenery, which might or might not change at various points during the show, with lighting and sound design, and where appropriate, even with special effects. Around 450 years ago, in the first purpose-built playhouses, the audience experience was quite different. But in what ways? Let's see what we can find out about early modern England's professional playing companies and the experiences of the audiences that flocked to see them. When we think about an Elizabethan or Jacobean theatre space, we will likely think of an image that looks like this: Shakespeare's Globe in Southwark. Or perhaps the Globe's companion venue on the same site, this one, the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse. These are both reconstructed spaces. They were built and fitted out after decades of intensive research that made use of, variously, archaeological finds, primary written accounts and images, like this detail from Wenceslaus Hollar's Long View of London from Bankside, or this sketch of the interior of the Swan Theatre, which, in addition to showing how the inside of the space looked, also depicts a performance in progress. However, as I mentioned, these are reconstructed spaces, but there are still a couple of extant, original performance spaces from that time that often get overlooked in discussions of William Shakespeare and his contemporaries. In that important hub for legal training across the centuries, the Temple, we have this. Middle Temple Hall was completed in 1573, and it would be put to multiple uses, including hosting performances from professional playing companies. When the lawyer and diarist John Manningham was a student at the Middle Temple, he watched just such a performance. In an entry dated to the 2nd of February 1601, which would be 1602 for us, as we are familiar with the new style of dating, Manningham writes, quote, "At our feast," meaning Candlemas presumably, "we had a play called 12 Night, or What You Will." He explains the plot as follows: a good practice in it to make the steward believe his lady widow was in love with him, by counterfeiting a letter as from his lady in general terms, telling him what she liked best in him, and prescribing his gesture in smiling, his apparel, etc. And then, when he came to practice, making him believe they took him to be mad. While it is possible to visit Middle Temple Hall, access is limited. However, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, William Shakespeare's company, and many others, also performed in another space that still stands today, one that's open to the public much more frequently. This one, the Great Hall at Hampton Court Palace. Charlotte Hodgman, writing for BBC Travel, explains that it was, quote, used regularly as a theatre during the reign of Elizabeth I. And in 1572, a stage was erected against the screen, with an adjoining chamber serving as a dressing room for the players. The Great Watching Chamber was reportedly used for rehearsals. The Great Hall appears to have continued its role as a part-time theatre well after the establishment of permanent playhouses, and its final performance is recorded as taking place on the 18th of October 1731, although the stage was not finally cleared away until 1798. The first Christmas that King James VI and first celebrated in England was spent at Hampton Court Palace, and even though the records of this period are somewhat scant, what we have is tantalising, and it points to it being a very merry time that was surely enhanced by the collection of playing companies that were at court vying for preferment. In addition to William Shakespeare's company, who were by then the King's Men, having formerly been the Lord Chamberlain's Men, Daniel Swift explains, quote, other theatre companies were at court that Christmas. The Lord Admiral's Men and Worcester's Men, soon to become the Prince's Men and Queen Anne's Men, played for the royal family. Nevertheless, it would be the King's Men that performed most frequently during this period. The accounts of the 18th of January have them being compensated for 6 performances at Hampton Court. as to which plays were performed by the various companies across this festive period, according to Swift, quote, "It seems likely that A Midsummer Night's Dream, Jonson's Sir Janus' Fall, and the anonymous Fair Maid of Bristow were played for the king, and possible that the king's men also performed Twelfth Night, Troilus and Cressida, and the two Henry IV plays, or Henry V. Alvin B. Kernan believes that Hamlet would also have been staged, specifically on the 26th of December. If we compare the spaces we've just discussed, put the extant hall spaces alongside the reconstructed ones, I think we're going to see some similarities in the layouts. When the men of the professional playing companies set out to create their permanent playhouses in the mid-1500s, they built spaces that felt familiar. And I think the hall spaces of elite houses would have been aspirational spaces for them. And for that reason, they replicated the feel, the look of them in the theatres they made. The other performance option they had prior to the construction of the permanent playhouses were repurposed animal baiting yards and or inn yards. These were locations where temporary scaffold stages, often brought in on a cart, could be set up, where ingress and egress of an audience could be controlled, and thus a fee charged. As John H. Astington explains, quote, "Inn yards were favoured places to stage and watch plays within London, even after the first playhouses were opened for business. It is thought that the permanent playhouse stages would have been richly decorated, and this has been explored in both the reconstructed spaces on the modern Shakespeare's Globe site. Over the stage, we see the roof is decorated to represent the heavens, with stars, clouds, a sun, moon or lunar, zodiac signs, and cherubs or putti. The back screen, containing the entrances and exits and the reveal, and also the musician's gallery, is richly decorated with a scheme that includes gold leaf. It has also been suggested that all of the wood in these spaces might have been decorated, perhaps to resemble marble columns, which is what's happened on the pillars we see on stage in the open-air space. When it comes to scenery that might be specific to certain plays, or even to individual scenes within those plays, that seems to be a technique of later theatrical work. Now, I have no doubt that the professional playing companies of early modern England were very capable of building their playhouses with the capacity to offer changeable backdrops or scenery. Of course, if that potential had, in turn, then influenced the drama that the playing companies were creating, that would potentially root that drama into the playhouse space alone. However, as we've already discussed, the professional playing companies did have reason to travel with their work, to inn yards on occasion, but also to the palaces of their noble and royal patrons. For example, when plague forced the closure of the playhouses. At this time, noble and royal country estates were a key place where plays could be performed and therefore a fee earned. Thus, the drama that is being created by the players had to be, for want of a better word, portable. Large stage flats or even hangings that required a structure to support them or perhaps a mechanism to fly them in and out were simply not conducive to the realities of early modern professional playing. Nevertheless, this does not and should not be read as meaning that the professional playing company's work was not visually rich, wherever it might have been staged. Because in addition to the aesthetics of elite hall spaces or purpose-built playhouses of the kind we see reproduced at Southwark today, there were also often elaborate costumes. Company patrons might donate clothing, or lend it. Sometimes playing companies were known to act as effectively pawnbrokers, taking in the fine attire of elite people and exchanging it for ready money. The ready money that was taken at the theatre door week in, week out. The tiring house was more than just a changing room. It was also a space where a team of people, many of them women, worked to maintain and improve costly attire for the stage. Seamstresses would be there, fixing, mending, reworking, even making up required garments. And then the spanglers could sew on beads and sequins that would glitter. These would appear like the real jewels that they were either representing or perhaps replacing. The tiring house might also function as a kind of workshop or storehouse for stage props. For a very rough idea of how the performers might have looked in their costumes and with their props, we can look to this, the so-called Peacham drawing, which, according to the arguments of some scholars, dates to the mid-1590s and depicts the first scene of Titus Andronicus. Much commentary has been put forward on the anachronistic costume and prop choices that we see here. Notice how Roman attire has been set alongside Elizabethan-style clothing and 16th century weaponry. However, the date of production for this image and the subject matter that's depicted is disputed, with some arguing that this actually shows a German version of the play and that it dates to some decades later, around 1620. Coming off and connected to this topic of stage weapons, though, it's worth pointing out that we aren't sure how violence and death was actually staged in the early modern period. I mean, it's possible that players learnt, for example, in some circumstances, from a marketplace mountebank, who would stab themselves before an audience. These individuals would survive this experience by using a pig's bladder filled with blood placed in front of a protective board. The result would be buckets of blood spilling from the belly without the risk of death. It could be that a butcher's shop would be frequented if, for example, entrails were required. When it came to the use of severed heads or limbs, if they were shown on stage, maybe they were carved and painted, or perhaps fashioned in some other way. For an indication of the kinds of clothing and props owned by an early modern professional playing company, modern scholars are indebted to the records that were kept by the theatrical impresario Philip Henslowe. He was a partner in the building of the Rose Theatre, which opened in or before 1587. The playing company he worked with was the Lord Admiral's Men. His papers have been compiled and published, and I will leave links to an open access version in the description box. In them, we obtain a fascinating insight into the running of a professional playing company and a theatre, from takings at the door to lists of plays that were paid for and inventories of costumes, which I am now showing on screen. Do let me know if you would like a deep dive into these costume items. We are starting with those that are noted as being gone and lost. And I have no doubt that a company would have been most displeased if these items were in fact lost, as the description we see of them does point to them being pretty pricey in most cases. There is also a separate category for suits, for clowns, hermits, and diverse others. Other apparel is also listed, as are books that have been purchased. However, for us to get an understanding of what an early modern audience member might see on stage, in addition to the fine decorations of the performance space and the elaborate, expensive clothing worn by the actors, what I want to focus on now is this: the inventory of all the properties for my Lord Admiral's Men, which was made on the 10th of March, 1598. It lists the following: 1 rock, size undetermined; 1 cage, which presumably would have been large enough to fit a person in, and it is used, we believe, in the play Tamburlaine; 1 tomb; 1 hellmouth; 1 tomb of Guido; 1 tomb of Dido. It's not clear what the difference between these two tombs would be, nor how they might differ for the earlier tomb that is mentioned. Also, there is no tomb in the Marlowe Nash play of Dido, at least not one in the stage directions. It's interesting that the listing of the hellmouth sits within these tombs. Might that point to the hellmouth perhaps being of a similar size, or maybe of a similar appearance? This is unclear. We also have 1 bedstead, 8 lances, 1 pair of stairs for Phaethon. This refers to a now lost play by Thomas Dekker, which Henslowe paid for the year before this inventory is dated to. Presumably this play was based on the myth of the son of the sun god, who fails to pull his father's chariot correctly, and thus creates the frozen poles and equatorial deserts of Earth through his errors, which also cost him his life. We have 2 steeples and 1 chime of bells and 1 beacon. Again, I'm unclear on the size of these various items, also whether the chime of bells is for use on stage, in the musician's gallery, or perhaps off stage. The next entry is thought to refer to a heifer, specifically a sacrificial cow, for the play Phaethon, with dead or still limbs. In other words, I think, the limbs of this constructed animal are not required to move, or perhaps not required to bear its weight. We have 1 globe, 1 sceptre, and 3 clubs, 2 marchpanes. The modern equivalent of this being marzipan. There is also the City of Rome. Quite what form this took is also unclear, but it would have been used for Faustus. 1 golden fleece for a play Hercules, 2 rackets and 1 bay tree, 1 wooden hatchet, one leather hatchet, one wooden canopy, old Mahomet's head. It is debated as to whether this is referencing a head dress or an actual head. If the latter is the case, again, the size is unclear. One lion skin, which also would have been used for the play Hercules. One bear skin, and Phaethon's limbs, and Phaethon's chariot, and Argus's head. The last of these would have been used for Jupiter and Io. A Neptune fork and garland, used for Celio et Olympo. One crozier staff, Kent's wooden leg. I believe the next entry refers to Iris's head and rainbow. Again, the size is unclear. There is also one little altar. 8 vizards, these are masks, a tambourine bridle, one wooden mattock. Cupid's bow and quiver, the cloth of sun and moon. This cloth might be some form of scenic backdrop. It's telling, I think, though, that it has been placed within props rather than in a scenery category of its own. I assume that this is because of just how scant such a category would be. It's also unclear whether this would be fixed throughout a performance or perhaps brought in and or removed, maybe to set a particular scene at night. If the latter is the case, it's also unclear what mechanism would be used to include or remove it during a performance. They also had one boar's head and Cerberus's 3 heads, one caduceus, a staff of Hermes, 2 moss banks, and 1 snake. Were these moss banks big enough, strong enough to be stood upon? If so, does that mean they were keen to create different levels, different heights on stage for certain performances? 2 fanes or fans of feathers. Bellenden stables. This one has really got me stumped, because I have tried to figure out what on earth this might be referring to, and I'm afraid I have had no luck. Perhaps this is a familiar term to you. If so, I would greatly appreciate any insight. We also have 1 tree of golden apples, Tantalus's tree, 9 iron targets, 1 copper target, 17 foils. I'm unclear as to whether these targets, both the iron and the copper ones, were intended for use on stage during a performance, or if instead they were intended to be used for training, perhaps for stage combat with those 17 foils. Perhaps that's also what the 4 wooden targets were used for. There is reference to 1 greave armour. Greaves are the part of the armour that protects the lower leg. I'm unsure as to whether this is a pair of greaves, so 1 armour for both legs, or simply 1 singular greave. There is 1 sign for Mother Redcap. This would be a sign for a tavern or an inn. There is also 1 buckler. This was a small shield. We have Mercury's wings, Tasso pictures, 1 helmet with a dragon, 1 shield with 3 lions, 1 elm bowl. 1 chain of dragons. This may perhaps refer to a pair of dragons for use in Medea. 1 gilt spear. 2 coffins. 1 bull's head. 1 vilta, or maybe viltra. This is another one that I am unclear on what this refers to and what it could possibly be. If this term seems familiar to you, though, please do let me know. 3 timbrels. These are instruments that would have been similar to a modern-day tambourine. 1 dragon in Fausts. This is thought to relate to the dragon in Faustus. We have 1 lion, 2 lions' heads, 1 great horse with his legs. I think this is intending to specify this is a full statue or model of a horse, not simply a head or a head and torso. We have 1 sackbut. This is another instrument, but this one is similar to a modern-day trombone. We have 1 wheel and frame in the Siege of London. So I believe this represents a siege weapon like a trebuchet, for example. We've got 1 pair of wrought gloves. I believe this refers to a pair of armoured gloves. 1 Pope's mitre, 3 imperial crowns, 1 plain crown. We have 1 ghost crown and 1 crown with a sun. 1 frame for the heading in Black Joan. This refers to a scaffold upon which a beheading would take place. 1 black dog, and 1 cauldron for the dew. This is the cauldron of boiling water that is referred to and used in Christopher Marlowe's The Dew of Malta. So, while they may not have used scenery, or at least used scenery in the ways that we are most familiar with, can we perhaps infer from all of this that the early modern professional stage was anything but bare? Well, what do you think? of the evidence we've explored in this video. Do you think you would notice a big difference between a modern production and an early modern one? Would the lack of scenery and scene changes perhaps feel jarring to you? Or do you think that the other elements on display would make all the difference? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. I'd also love if you pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, get this video shared out more, and help us to grow our community. I'm thinking we are going to need to do something theatrical, so whether that's the masks or maybe a stage, I'm pretty sure that both of those are available as emojis. Either way, do make sure that you write why you've picked what you've picked, because apparently the algorithm goblins do like words a little bit more than they like emojis on their own. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those, and we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friend. If you like the channel, let some pals know about it. You can support this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, have a little check now, just to make sure you're not mysteriously unsubscribed against your will. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop that will appear, and that way YouTube claim they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I will next be going live, which I do once a month to talk about the history news. I get sent lots of history news items, whether that's about new discoveries, repatriation news, people misbehaving in various heritage sites, and events and exhibitions. At the moment, it's running for about 2.5 hours. It's a good time. I don't think you're going to want to miss it. We have, of course, got our failsafe, though. If you head to my website, which will be linked, it is www.katrinamarchant.com. If you go to the contact page of the website, you'll see this box. Put your email address in that box and then hit sign up. That will add you to my list and will let me send you out an email once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to send you useful links for my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.